The month of May commemorates the establishing of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, in 1963 and is recognized as Africa Month across the continent. So, in a way, we cannot really speak about Africa Month and not speak of former President Thabo Mbeki in his commemoration speech. That speech, I'm an African, which he delivered on the 8th of May 1996 on the occasion of Parliament's adoption of this country's constitution. We're setting up a conversation for you in the next few minutes, but just to remind you, take a listen to some of the words that were spoken in that speech.
I'm an African. I am born of the peoples of the continent of Africa. Pain of the violent conflict that the peoples of Liberia and of Somalia, of the Sudan, of Burundi and Algeria, is a pain I also bear. The dismal shame of poverty, suffering and human degradation of my continent is a blight that we share. The blight on our happiness that derives from this and from our drift to the periphery of the ordering of human affairs leaves us in a persistent shadow of despair. This is a savage road to which nobody should be condemned. This evolution of humanity says that Africa reaffirms that she is continuing her rise from the ashes. Whatever the setbacks of the moment, nothing can stop us now. Whatever the difficulties, Africa shall be at peace. However improbable it may sound to the skeptics, Africa will prosper. Whoever we may be, whatever our immediate interest, however much we carry a baggage from our past, however much we have been caught by the fashion of cynicism and loss of faith in the capacity of the people, let us err today and say, nothing can stop us now.
So admittedly, it's a bit of an indulgent, self-indulgent conversation because we do appreciate the space to really reflect on some of the artistry and the rhyme and poetry of that speech. But at the same time, it's an important conversation that reflects how far we've come from those days, those bold declarations that say, I'm an African. So let's do that. I'm joined by Victor Kgomoeswana, Marketing and Communications Executive Director at the University of Limpopo, but also someone who keenly follows developments on the African continent and a commentator on the continent, as well as Lerato Tsebe, an independent African researcher who joins us on the line. Good afternoon to the both of you. Victor, let me start with you. Right. You hear a lot of people, and this exercise that you and I are doing, by the way, is something that academics and scholars across the continent tend to do. Take the speech, put it on the table, dissect it and analyze it. Exactly. You hear a lot of people saying it was poetry and not going further than that. Was it just poetry?
No chance. There's no chance it was just poetry. There was a vision. The man was saying, remember who you are. It's hard to build anything good if you don't know yourself. Number two, if you listen, he talks about common heritage for all humanity. That's why he talks about Malay and the Chinese and then he's saying we are all one. Remember, Africa is the cradle of humankind. So he was sensitizing us. But he was also talking about honoring those who came before us, the martyrs, that never dishonor the price that many people paid. But also he was saying, we shall prevail, we shall overcome. In the end, if you remember, no matter how long it takes. Yeah. But think about it. What happened since 1996? The African Union came out of the old OAU. Pan-African Parliament has been established. Today, as we speak, African Continental Free Trade Area has been signed. There's free trade across the continent. Lots of things have happened. So it was the beginning of an era that he was ushering. He was saying, yes, we are all rainbow nation, but our common heritage is more humanity. But it's humanity that must recognize that we are African. I would say it wasn't poetry. Yeah. Of course, he needed the poetry. Because if you're going to be remembered, you must make a speech that's potent. And that's his signature speech. Just like I Have a Dream, Martin Luther King, just like Kwame Nkrumah's 1957 speech about the future, the freedom of Ghana is nothing unless it's linked to that. Just like, there are those signature speeches. Yes. And I think this is
memorable speeches.
Definitely.
Lerato, let me bring you in here. Your reflections on that question. There's a great deal of poetry in there and a retelling and storytelling that talks about the African continent, its history and heritage. But would you say it was merely poetry without any substance in terms of diagnosing what ailed the African continent at that point in time, but also what the possible pathways to solutions, what that looks like?
Well, I think it is definitely much more than a piece of poetry to this. I mean, you must remember the timing of the speech as well contextually on historical timeline. Those speeches coming in after South Africa adopted the Constitution in 1996. And it's right at the inception point where, former President Thabo Mbeki is rolling out this massive architecture of Pan-African institutions that are going to essentially become the repository of this Pan-African ideology that he has. And when I say repository, I mean these are the institutions that are sort of really to speak to giving birth to the or the aspirations, rather, of seeing a unified and peaceful continent. Also institutions that
Lerato, we don't seem to have the best of lines. We don't seem to have the best of lines to you. Let's see if we can get you on a better connection, because I really would want to have your inputs as well. But Victor, let me take the conversation forward with you in the meantime. Tell me about the extent to which a speech such as this one was intended and perhaps succeeded or didn't succeed in helping inculcate an appreciation that South Africa is an integral part of Africa, for better or worse, whether problems come or success and great victories come.
You want to make me cry right now, because when I listen to fellow South Africans talk about, or some of them, talk about the continent as if it's still out there, and we are down here, I weep. But what we could have maybe missed is that after the speech, he became president, and then the movement to the reunification and reconscientization of Africans happened. I think what did not happen was, after he left office, that African project wasn't sustained as well as it could have. If you remember the story about, this is Joburg, this is not some highway in Malawi. I mean, that tells you the difference between the presidency of Thabo Mbeki and the president of Jacob Zuma. President Zuma did not do as much as he should have done to sustain that trajectory, because by the time we sent Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma to Addis Ababa that was all the ripple effects of that speech. I wouldn't say the speech itself, but the presidency of Thabo Mbeki, that he was trying to conscientize and make everybody aware. But the fact that he managed to get the Pan-African Parliament to come to South Africa, I think was a scoop, because it made sure that South Africans remember that they are part of this. Right. But unfortunately, it's not long after that we saw Francophone Africa fighting at the very parliament, fighting Anglophone Africa. People are still showing a leaning or a hankering after the very colonial divisions that kept us apart for so long.
Victor, I tell you what, I'm out of time, but I'll ask you to stick around, because I wanted us to really savor this conversation and really take it in, and also fuse it in with what's happening on the continent right now, as well as some of the envisioning that our continental leaders have done to build on that legacy. So don't go anywhere. We'll wrap up the conversation in just a moment. That's Victor Kgomoeswana. We are also joined by Lerato Tsebe, independent African researcher. So Victor, let me pick up. We didn't want to leave the conversation hanging, and therefore we decided to just extend it a little bit. Let's talk about that speech happens. You talk about the institutions that start falling in place. There's the conversion of Organization of African Unity to the African Union with that change. But have we carried the momentum from there to where we are now? Agenda 2063, you mentioned the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. To what extent have we been able to carry that momentum?
You mentioned them. I'm happy that we have the Anti-African Continental Free Trade Area. The protocols are in place. We are starting to see projects, projects like the one-stop bridges between different countries. Started with the likes of Chirundu border post between Zimbabwe and Zambia. I think Rwanda has about five or six of them. One-stop border posts. These are very important. The work that is being done on the N1, the Bait Bridge, modernization and extension to make sure that people can move and goods can move across. The banks, the SADC banks, at least the SADC banks have managed to create a platform for themselves to transfer money. You're starting to see currencies being used, African currencies being used. But even, I think, let's not ignore the BRICS dimension. The fact that Africa or African countries were able to build new alliances, trade alliances with the likes of Russia, the likes of India, Brazil, and China, that makes it much more easier or gives Africans more options to close relations. Of course, Africa is still too indebted. Of course, beneficiation is still not happening at the level that it should. You can have one refinery by Dangote, it's a breakthrough, but we should be doing a lot more beneficiation. Because like I say, President Thabo Mbeki was not just about politics, he was even more about economics. And the fact that the economic story has not advanced as much, African countries are still counted among the poorest in the world. The HDI, Human Development Index, is still low among most African countries. That's not a good story. But at least I would say, compared to 1996 when he made the speech, there's a lot more awareness, a lot more consciousness.
Lerato, let me see if I have you on a better line at this moment. Just envisioning is important, of course. Are you able to draw a line between the envisioning as represented by that seminal speech in 1996 and some of what we are seeing now, including the instruments that I've mentioned in the last few minutes, the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, as well as some of the documents and instruments and institutions that African leaders have set up over the last while?
Absolutely, Tilas, and I hope you can hear me loudly and clearly. I think that this form has really metamorphed from just being a speech that former president made in 1996, and it's sort of now become an anthem. And it's very interesting in that way because I think a lot of his aspirations and the wording of the text of the speech have really manifested, as Victor is saying, into various institutions. You've got AUDA NAPAD, you've got the AFCFTA, and then you've got other acts of Pan-African agency, if you will, where people have, as Victor is saying, now joined up to become BRICS member states. I want to also really come back to what Victor is saying and really concur with him in saying that very much the economic component of wanting to see Africa rise and become an economic giant really hasn't gone as far as it possibly could. But I think that institutions like the AFCFTA and other organs of AU apparatus and other regional bodies should hopefully help buttress that along.
All right, I've got to leave it there. I'm completely out of time. Thank you for spending some time with me this afternoon. That's Victor Kgomoeswana, who is the Marketing and Communication Executive Director at the University of Limpopo, also a commentator on the story of the African continent, as well as Lerato Tsebe, an independent African researcher.